partway through the speech that I gave at the סיום, I realized the recorder was not recording yet, and I actually noticed that right before the main part of the speech where we get into the Divrei Torah, I do want to re-record some of the introductory remarks. The סיום was made in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Naftali Hertz ben Sina Rezel, Chaya Krandel bas Ruda, Chaya Leah bas Esther, and Le'ili Nishmas Miriam Elka bas Tzvidov, and Tzvidov ben Meir Eliyahu. We thanked all of the participants, all of the sponsors, all of those that helped set up the סיום. Also, a special thank you to my wife, who obviously heard the remarks there, so we don't need to repeat them on this recording. We also spoke about Kedushas Beis HaKnesses. We held the סיום in our makeshift social hall, which is inside the hallways of the Cheder building, and we spoke out how, even though we really could make the סיום in the Beis Medrash itself, being that, number one, we rent the area, and it's not always used as a Beis Medrash by those who rent it to us, and the fact that it's a סיום HaShas, which has also had time to be made inside the Beis Medrash if you don't have another suitable place for it. We made it inside the hallways of the Cheder upon the recommendation of a hamburger, who said that we are one of the purposes of the Moreshes Ashkenaz that he set up, which our Kehila is a portion of, is to raise the awareness of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, which has fallen to the wayside in recent generations, and therefore, even though perhaps we have a halachic heter to do so, we will make our simcha in the hallway of the Cheder, our makeshift social hall, like we make all of our simchas, and not in the actual Beis HaKnesses itself. And so since the point was to make that statement, so we felt important to actually point out what we were doing at the time. And we mentioned the Gemara in Taanis, Rav Yossi Omer, Lo mekomo tal adam mechabdo el adam mechabid es mekomo, and therefore wherever the סיום is held, you have the kavod of those that participated in the סיום being there, and that's what gives the mayim of the kavod, not the place that it's being held in. So the Yevanim, their idea was lashkichim Torah to make us forget our Torah, and therefore, what better way to celebrate on Hanukkah our victory over the Yevanim than to make Siyumim that celebrate our chazara of learning, that we try not to forget our learning. So this סיום, I think, is a kiyum of the Halav Hodah of Hanukkah, that this gufa is the Hodah. We're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the ability to learn. How do you show that Hakar Satov? By learning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is allowing us not to forget the Torah, and Baruch Hashem, so we are accomplishing that. That is, I think, the best way of expressing that Halav Hodah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that. Now, it's possible that we can tie in the סיום into something we spoke about this past Shabbos. We spoke about the Gemara in Brachos, Amar B'Yeshua ben Levi, Haroas Chaver La'achar Shloshim Yom, Omer Baruch Shechiyanu V'Kiyimanu V'Yonu L'Zman Hazeh, and La'achar Yud Beis Chodesh, Omer Baruch Mechayim Mesid. If a person doesn't see his friend for 12 months, then he makes a bracha of Baruch Mechayim Mesid. Amar Rav, Ein HaMeis Mishtakech Min Alev, El Achar Shnei Masar Chodesh, Shenemar Nishkachti Kemeis Milev Hayisi Kechli Ovi. That mace is only forgotten from the leave after 12 months, as the pasuk says, Nishkachti Kemeis Milev Hayisi Kechli Ovi. Now we asked a question from Rashi last week's parsha, where it says that Yaakov Avinu was not able to be comforted over the loss of Yosef. Rashi said, a person can't be mechabel tanchum on a person that's alive if he thinks he's dead. The gezerah is only that a dead person can be forgotten and not a live person. So the question is that we see from the Gemara in Brachos that a live person is also forgotten after 12 months, because after 12 months, if you don't see your friend, you make the bracha of Baruch Mechayim Mesid. So why is it that Rashi says that the gezerah is specifically only for a mace, when in fact we find the same thing applies also to a chai? So what we ended up answering by the end of Shabbos, we took answers from the Bnei Kehila throughout Shabbos, and what I came up with at the end was as follows. That the idea of forgetting over here can't be understood kipshuto, that the person forgets, because everybody knows that if someone loses a loved one, so they don't forget about him after 12 months. After 12 months, they can still remember the person. They have memories of the person who passed away. Rather, the idea of shichacha, the way we want to explain, is the concept that a person can accept the reality that he's in and move on with life. Right? So he can accept the fact that the person is no longer here, and he can continue with life, even though he remembers the person, but it's something that he can accept. And we explained that, as Rashi pointed out in the Gemara, from the pasuk of Hayisi Kli Oved, this din has a nafkamina also for the halacha of Yush, that if a person loses an item, so we say after 12 months, it's considered as if he certainly forgot already about the item, and the person can keep it. So the idea is not that he forgot about the item that he lost and he can't remember that he ever had it. The idea is he has moved on. He's accepted the reality that he doesn't have this object anymore, and now he can go weiter, and therefore he's not concerned about it. If someone else finds it, they can keep it. So this is a gezerah where it comes out most bolate when it comes to a mace. And that's something we would think a person would never be able to accept if at the time that the person passed away it was something that's very difficult for him. So then why would it be that after 12 months all of a sudden he can accept it? That's a special gezerah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts in, but it's not something specific to the mace. The mace is the prime example of that, and then that applies also to all situations. However, the reason why it didn't apply to Yaakov Avinu is because the koach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave for a person to accept the reality works in as so much as it's the reality. A person cannot accept something which isn't true. So therefore, had someone told Yaakov Avinu that his son was in Mitzrayim, very far away, and he couldn't see him, perhaps after 12 months Yaakov could have accepted that reality. But to accept that he was no longer amongst the living when that wasn't the reality, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't put a koach in the Bria. Sam Sofer in Even Ezer, Shaisu Chuvas Even Ezer, Simon Kuf Yotes explains that that's also the reason for the din of being able to redeem a house inside a walled city for 1 year after it's sold, is because the Torah gives the person moves out, it was his house, the person has a certain attachment to it, and after 12 months or after the year, so then he is less attached to it, and he's now can accept the reality that he's living somewhere else and there's someone else living in his house, and from that point on the Torah doesn't give him rishus anymore to redeem the house. Now, lefi the pashtus of what we've explained, l'chora there shouldn't be any kesher between all of this and the idea of reviewing your learning every year, because we explained it's not an idea of forgetting, it's an idea of accepting the matzah as it is. However, also, just the reality is, we see when it comes to remembering learning, it doesn't seem to be totally specifically on 12 months, because most of what we learn we forget immediately after we're done learning it, and some of the stuff we retain even after a year. It doesn't seem to be specifically connected a year to forgetting one's learning. So therefore it would seem that these two concepts aren't related to one another at all. However, we find also by Parshas Zachar that there's an idea of forgetting every year. The Sam Sofer says that the reason for Parshas Zachar coming every year is in order to mekayim the mitzvah lo tishkach, that you shouldn't forget. If you don't remind yourself every year, so then you'll forget it. So how do we understand that based on what we've been explaining up until this point? So I think if we tweak a little bit our explanation of what the shichacha is that we're referring to, I think we can explain how everything works together. So we're already moving into a whole new territory than what we spoke about past Shabbos. So anyone who is sleeping, because you already heard it, you should wake up now. And the idea is as follows, that I think the idea of the 12 months is an idea of focus. And everything that happens to a person, there could be a mushal of like a ripple. Like the things that are happening right now are in the middle, and they push away things that have happened earlier. And as more things happen in the present, the things that happened in the past get pushed further to the periphery, and a person's focus of what molds his emotions and what holds his attention is going to be he can focus on a year amount of time in front of him. And that's the idea that we're referring to. And that's why, say 12 months after a person is nifter, so that event already moved to the periphery, and it's out of focus, it's out of the focus of the person, it's not the focus of his life anymore. He can now move on, as we said before, he can now move on with his life as this particular event is no longer in focus. That's also the same idea if a person doesn't see his friend for 12 months. So he used to be very close with him, he spoke to him all the time, he thinks about him, and then after 12 months that friend is already in periphery, already not in the focus of the year, and he's not focusing on him anymore. Every Masechta that you learn is also your friend. And we all know that there's Maisim, and I don't know the details because I'm not really such a Maisim person, although maybe I should be. Being a Rav now, so I have to tell over Maisim. But there's a famous Maisim. Oh, what? But not Hasish, okay. But there's a famous Maisim, and I don't remember all the details, about someone who learned Maseches Chagiga like 100 times. His whole life he learned Maseches Chagiga, and then the Masechta came to him in the form of a person.
He died.
Oh, after he died?
Nobody knew about it.
Oh, no one knew, and someone came to bury him?
Was crying.
All right, here's the story. No, you're not saying it? Okay. I could make it up based on what I heard. Is that no one was there to bury him, and no one knew about the fact that he died, and a woman came, and she was over the olam, that there was this person that needed to be buried, and they came and buried him, and they found out who is this? What's her name? And her name is Chagiga.
And afterwards, they looked for her again, and she was gone.
I looked for her and she was gone. The idea is that the Masechta came in the form of a person in order to help out the person who learned the Masechtas Chagiga. We also know another famous story. It's a medrash in the North Hamor. Okay. Next time maybe I'll look up the story before I. Okay. There's also the famous story about the Beis Yosef, who a bas kol came out, and the bas kol I think said it was the kol of Shisha Sidrei Mishnah that was speaking to him. So we form a relationship with the Masechtas that we learn, and the idea of chazering every 12 months is not necessarily so that we don't forget the actual dinim that are found in Masechta, but we want to keep the Masechta in our focus. We want to keep the Masechta part of our lives, something that affects what we do and how we think. And that's what we say, Hadran Alach, the Hadrach Alan, that we want to keep a kesher with the Masechta, and that we can do by chazering our learning every year. Now, there's a halachic shiloh that comes up this year, and that is, since this year is a leap year, so we're going to have 13 months between today and next Hanukkah. So the question is, for the Siyum for the upcoming year, when should we have the Siyum? Should we have the Siyum on Hanukkah? That'll be 1 year from the current Siyum, or should our Siyum be in 12 months, right? Because the Shechachah seems to take effect after 12 months, and we should really have the Siyum at the end of Cheshvan. So we have to discuss what we're going to do this year. Now, the Gedolei Olam already spoke about this in regards to Parashat Zachar. The Maram Shik quotes from the Chassam Sofer that they asked the Chassam Sofer, what do you do in a leap year if you forget after 12 months? The Chassam Sofer says that the reason for saying Parashat Zachar is in order so that a person doesn't forget. That's to be Mekayim, the mitzvah lo tishchach. So then, how can we wait after a leap year? We're going to be, or during a leap year, we're waiting until Adar Sheni. It's going to be more than 12 months since the previous time we said Parashat Zachar. So how could we yotzei the din of lo tishchach? So the Maram Shik said that the Chassam Sofer answered that in fact you should have kavana during the parasha of Kiteitzei when they read that parasha during the rest of the parashas of the year, and Chassam Sofer that's the proper thing to do, and it seems to be that Chassam Sofer said that was his minig as well. However, it's pointed out by many poskim that the Chassam Sofer writes exactly the opposite of this in the tshuva that we were quoting before in Even Ezer, Simin Kuf Yotes, and he says over there that the way Shechachah works is that it goes after the year, it doesn't go after the months. So therefore, if you have a leap year of 13 months, so the shikha won't kick in, or it changes the whole teva of how the brain works and how the psychology works, that instead of forgetting in 12 months, so you'll only forget after 13 months. That's what he explains. He brought a raya from the Batei Arichoma, like we spoke about before, that goes after 13 months. Right, if there's a leap year, then you can redeem the house the whole 13 months. And the Chassam Sofer explained that was mitam the shikha that we've been speaking about. And he also brought a raya from the fact that Chazal are masaking Parashat Zachar in such a way where on a leap year it only comes out after 13 months. He says it can't be that we were relying on Parashat Kitese because in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the Takana, their minute was only to finish the whole Sefer Torah once every 3 years. They had a different cycle for the weekly Parsha. And therefore, the middle of the 3 years doesn't have Kitese and doesn't even have Parashat B'Shalach, which maybe you could also be Yotzei Zecheres Amalek with. So therefore, you don't have Bnei Yisrael would not be Yotzei this mitzvah based on the way Chazal were mitaking the Kriyas of Harshios. So therefore, from these two rayas, he brings that whenever we find this idea of a year, it includes the leap month, and we go with the 13 months. We go from, with the date. So if we're making the Siyum in Hanukkah, next year we could also make the Siyum on Hanukkah, even though it'll be 13 months. We won't have yet forgotten our learning. And it seems to be this is also Halacha L'Maisa. Everybody knows that Reb Chaim Kanievsky makes the Siyum al Kol Torah Kula every Erev Pesach. Right, so what's he going to do this year when Erev Pesach is 13 months after the previous Erev Pesach? I think he still always makes the Siyum on Erev Pesach. So therefore, Halacha L'Maisa, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to make the Siyum again next Hanukkah, not at the end of Teshpab. Every time we make a yearly Siyum, so one of the kavanos of the Siyum is in order to be Ma'or the Tzibur, to be Makabel also on themselves, to review part of their learning, at least the chelak of their learning, every year, in order to be Mekayim this Inyan. That's why also tonight you'll see we're going to have many people being Messiahim, different Masechtas. They were Makabel upon themselves last year at the Siyum to Chazer, and the hope is that everybody here also will be Makabel upon themselves to Chazer, and we can all make a Siyum together, Bezos Hashem, 13 months from now. So, I want to explain L'Maisa how a person can Chazer all of Shas in a year in 5 clear steps. Right? So just in case anyone thinks that it can't be done, I'll explain to you how you can do it. You need a few factors. First thing you need is Ratzon. You need to want to do it. Hopefully the Hizoros of the Siyum will make people want to do it. So you'll have the Ratzon. The second thing you need to know is that you have the ability to do it. Right? Most people think that they don't have the koach to do such a thing. So I'll explain to you very simply how you can show yourself that you can accomplish such things, right? Even if it's not all of Shas, but at least a good portion of Shas, is a daf that you know well, you should be able to learn in less than 10 minutes. You should be able to review in less than 10 minutes. I'm assuming most of the people here have daf that they know very well, and they've seen themselves that when they review it, they can review an entire daf in less than 10 minutes. If you haven't done that yet, so it's kedai to take a daf, review it 5 times in a row, and then see. Understand, you have to learn it well, understand each line, what it's doing, where the question is, where the answer is, understand what each word means, and then see if you can read through the daf. If you can read through the daf in less than 10 minutes, so then you know you're masugul to be able to finish Shas every year. Another important thing that you need to do is set a goal. Like set a goal. This year I'm going to chazer over a certain amount of Masechtas. You set that goal for yourself, and you figure out, the next step is you have to then figure out a time when you're going to do it. If you just say, well, this year I think I could chazer 5 Masechtas, but you don't set any time for it, you say, well, Kisha Efne, Eshne, so I'm really not sure what Pshat in the Gemara, Shemelo, Ifne, you're for sure not going to have time to do it. You have to schedule it in. If you realize how important the Chazar is, you schedule it into the schedule. And then you start with something little. You start with what you learned this past year, or a couple of Masechtas that you know well, and then every year, Mosif V'holech, which is the idea of Hanukkah. You light one nair on the first night, another nair on the second night, every day, Mosef Holech, that's what you should do also with your learning. As a Bachar in Yeshiva, you always hear that Hanukkah is really a yontif where you're supposed to learn more. And that works very well while you're a Bachar in Yeshiva. Then you get married and you have children, and you're wondering, what was the Mashgiach talking about? I mean, I have to leave Seder early to go light, and there's no way I'm going to make it back. And I have to go to Hanukkah parties, and I have to keep my kids entertained, and it's not a reality to be able to learn more. So I think what we have to translate that for ourselves as adults is that now's the time to be makabel. Now's the time to be makabel upon yourself learning. As it says in Gemara Tainis, we recently did in Daf Yomi. They had a gezerah against the Yidden, and one part of the gezerah was that they're not allowed to have a tainis. So Rav Zeir said what we'll do is we'll be makabel on ourselves that when the gezerah is over, then we will have a tainis. And from there, that will work. And how do you know this works? As soon as Daniel accepted upon himself to be Messiah, immediately he was already answered. He already was headed tonight. I think this is also very kashur to Hilchas Hanukkah, because we know when it comes to Hanukkah, we say Hadlaka Osa Mitzvah. Right? So the mitzvah on Hanukkah is just to light the fire. It'll burn as you continue. So we're here tonight, we're lighting the fire. The fire is the Kabbalah. I'd like to ask everybody who cared, which I think is everybody, to be makabel upon yourself, to chazer something, review something between now and next Hanukkah, 1 Masechta, 2 Masechtas, a Seder, whatever it is that you either know well or that you learned in the past year, something that you can review. Start with that and you'll see where it can take you. Alright, so now we're going to make the actual Siyumim. I usually make the Siyum last, I think. So we have a few Messiahim. Yosef Chaim, do you want to start off the Siyumim? Is Yosef Chaim here? He disappeared. Okay, so we're going to start with Reb Chaim Liebman. Maybe say also what you're doing this time.
You say Mesechus Brachos.
Alice. Oh, I should have.
Rabbi Yalov Zavra Yamina. Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Olam Shneimar. Chol Banai Kibiyad Hashem Barav Shalom Banai Chasim Banai Tela Boy Noyer. Shalom Rav Olavei Zazach Avigei Malamut Shali Shalom Mechelet Shalom B'Yav Nosai Kaman Achai B'Roya Adav B'Nai Shalom Aman Beis Hashem Elokeinu Avad Shalom Hashem Oiz V'Amon Zein Hashem Yiborei Hasanim V'Shalom Adon V'Acharoya U'Sligo L'Mesechus Brachos.
Rav Mordechai Markowitz. Rav Hanan Alamar.
אנחנו נעשה את הסיום של סדר הזמן, סיום של סדר הזמן. אני אגיד משהו קטן בשלב של הבוקר. ידוע שיש לחוק את המתחם המזיל, האם פוחד והולך או מוסיף והולך. המצב שחוק את המזיל שצריך להוסיף והולך. ברוך השם הרבורי, המסיים הוא כל השנה מוסיף והולך. זה עכשיו, הסיום הזה שהוא עושה עכשיו זה לא פעם אחת, זה פעמיים. הוא עושה את הסיום הזה, זה פעמיים. כל לימוד שהוא עושה זה עוד חזרה הוא עושה עליו, אז זה סיום של ש"ס פעמיים. וגם השנה הוא גם מוסיף גם סיום של תנ"ך
שולחן
ערוך. ידוע מה שהכהן אומר, שאור החיים למעלה למזכיל, למעלה סור וערב מטה. אם אדם כל שנה מסיים אותו דבר רק ש"ס, והוא לא מוסיף, אז הוא יורד. צריך כל הזמן לעלות. אור החיים למעלה למזכיל. אין כזה דבר לעמוד באמצע. אדם שבאמצע אז הוא בירידה. אם לא מוסיפים, אז זה יורדים. רק המלאכים הם עומדים, הבני אדם צריכים תמיד לעלות למעלה. טוב, סיום פה זה סוף מסכת הביגורים. סוף מסכת הביגורים. סיום בסדר דברים. פה כמו בבריאה מחלוקת, שרבי יוסף אומר שהאנדרוגינוס זה בריאה בפני עצמם. ולא יכולו חכמים להכריע על הגילויים של אישה, אבל טומטום לא כן, פעמים שהוא איש, פעמים שהוא אישה.
Yes, okay. What do you mean a Simon? Oh, Moed. Moed, Seder Moed, and Seder Nashim. Just read the last line and then see and then walk Seder Moed.
רבי אליעזר אומר, וחכמים אומרים לפני שהם מצופים. האדרון הולך סדר מועד. וכן הוא אומר, ואברהם אבינו עולו ושלום, ואברהם זוקן, והשם ברך את אברהם, בכל מצינו שעושה אברהם אבינו את כל הדורות כולו, עד שלא יתנו שנאמר עקב אשר שמע אברהם בקולי וישמור ושמרתי מצווסי חוקוסי ותורסי. עד המחסי בסדר קדושי. נשם.
Which way are we going to face for the Kaddish?
That way, no?
Okay, Simon Tanakh, Divrei Yomim, Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Chaf through Chaf Gimel. Vayoga Ashirs min Acherev El Bavel V'Yugo Vonav Al Vodem Ad Meluch Malchus Fros L'Maus Devar Hashem V'Yirmiyo Ad Rotzasa Ha'aretz Hashabsu Seha Kol Yimei Hashama Shavasa L'Malus Shivim Shana V'Shnat Achas L'Korshna L'Pras L'Pos Devar Hashem V'Yirmiyo Here Hashem Yisrach Korshna L'Pras V'Yaver Kol B'Chol Malchusov V'Gam V'Tov V'Mor Pomar Korshna L'Pras L'Amchus Aretz Nasan Li Hashem L'Kai Hashemayim V'Hupa Kadalai V'Nu Slo Ba'is B'Shalayim Asher B'Yehuda Mi B'Chem Yichol Amo Hashem L'Kav Imo V'Yal Hanolach Tanach Shulchan Aruch Simin Tav Chav Kosh Mishpat Simin Tav Chav Zayin Sif Yud Kol Over Al Dvar Me'ilu with Yotz Behead. If the person is over these things of sacking himself, not putting up a ma'ika, so Amar, and he says, I'm going to be masaking myself, what do other people care? Oh, any makivikach, or not makvid, makimus malchus maridus, we give him malchus maridus, nizar mehem lov virchas tov. Person that is nizar gets virchas tov, which the Gra explains that it means is that not only does he get the schar of being safe, because he's keeping himself safe, but he also gets the schar, he gets the schar olam haba for it. Sim on Shas at the end of Nida, Panbe Elio, Konashana Lachos, B'chol Yom Muftach Lushom El Haba, Shenemar, Halichos Omlo, Atrike Halichos Al Lachos, and I saw something very interesting from, or I heard from Rav Laff, that he says, you see, there's a big difference between what we call a person that's a Ben Olam Haba and a person that's a Balavera. We call a person that's a Ben Olam Haba a Ben Olam Haba, but a person that's a Balavera, we call him a Balavera. What's the difference? Because a Baal, someone that's married, right, if he's married to Avera especially, so then he can just divorce the Avera, and he's no longer Balavera. But a person's a Ben, remains a Ben forever. So the person's a Ben Olam Haba, so he takes that with him forever. Hanalach, Talon Bavli, Vahadapalon, Daitalach, Talon Bavli, Vadaitapalon, Snashinach, Talon Bavli, but this Nashinalon, Lobama, Dame Lamadasi. Hanalach, Talon Bavli, Vahadapalon, Daitalach, Talon Bavli, Vadaitapalon, when the Snashinach, Talon Bavli, when the Snashinalon, Dame Lamadasi. Hanalach, Talon Bavli, Vahadapalon, Daitalach, Talon Bavli, Vadaitapalon, when the Snashinach, Talon Bavli, Snashinalon, Lobama, Dame Lamadasi. Yersol Fanachal, Atma Elohim, Le'evosinu. Shafeis are also going to see what I said. See one of them above. And you know, Rapapa, Nachma, Rapapa, Chai, Rapapa, Avamoy, Rapapa, Rapapa, Rax, Rapapa, Tzurk, Rapapa, Adam, Rapapa, Darba, Rapapa. Higher up, not money in the streets are also going to be Sam Chav Israel, and Yakol, and Nachma, same to say Am Chav Israel, going to Yishem, Al Yisrael, Self Lishma. May I invite the family to Safa Kulam, he become in the Kukaka, man, Loivosh, Moashak, who definitely go on Kisani, Borfat, Ilan, being Kukaka, Amen, 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 Salavai. Mona Manako, Fanapa, Mayo, in Layavosino, Shasam, the thing which should be some medrash. Those times the thing which should be Mioshi, Cornish, and Mashkim, in Mashkim, on Mashkim, every sort of Mashkim, Batil, on mainly common Sahar, the human common Sahar, on Rotsin, Kayo Haba. King Rasim Shachas Shenemar, Battle him, Fredim Shachas Anshi Dom Mirma, Loyaksumi, Vanim Tafloch, years old Panaklat Mayo High, Kishin to their Daniel Sayin Talmud Bavli, the Tanakh, Vishal Hanar, King has been a Haskum Seftus Farmachim Simon. Real model line English classes, kind of Scoldi Samter, Sefat Yavo, Sus Kotaman Bamaram, Salmini Khan, Yamu, Leo Zari, so Thomas Torin V, Zari, Adalong. This kind of Salafatan Hosach, Bishop Tishmar Lecha, the Kitsoski to Sichecha. TV your boy Yamacha Yosiva Hoshnos Kaim or Bimina, this Moshe Bechabod, Adonai Oza Moitain, Adonai Varech, Samova Shalom.